Welcome, Asha. I am so honored and excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I would love you to just start out by telling everybody who you are. I know that is impossible to do in 2 minutes, but let's just give a quick background of who you are.
So I'd like to introduce myself traditionally. My spirit name is Healing Rainbow Woman, Nada Naguyapkwe. I am from Nation Agamin, Cape Coker First Nation, and I'm from the Crane Clan, Ajijak Dodam. I'm a mama of 2 boys, and I am a daughter and granddaughter of brilliant people. I'm an auntie. I'm a medicine woman and an author and an oracle deck creator. I have been in business for just over 20 years as a healer. I was a homeopath for 15 years and then transitioned into more medicine work and ceremony work. And then, of course, wrote my book. So things have kind of changed and taken a different direction since then. And my ancestors are from the lands of so-called Ontario. And I am an Anishinaabe, which is one of the First Nation tribes in Canada.
That is so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I first had the honor of being exposed to you and your work through a community that you were a part of as well, and that I was a part of through Dr. Valerie Rain, who's also been on this podcast. And there was just something about you and the way you spoke to us. And honestly, I can't even remember I don't remember any words other than I just felt so grounded, and your presence just felt so healing. And I was just like, I just want to be around you more, even if it's just on the internet. So I just want to say that, I don't know, something about your presence is just so beautiful. And I know it was right when your book was coming out, which is right here. You Are the Medicine. And I immediately bought it or pre-ordered it or whatever it was. And then, I'm going to be honest, it came and I was like, am I allowed to read this? Wait a minute. It was such an interesting experience. And what was funny, if I had just picked it up and read it, you addressed all of that immediately. But of course, I didn't. It was funny because it never made it onto my shelf. I have a little meditation corner. So it sat in this basket that I have for probably months. And I think many of us are so deeply especially with social media and awareness, it's been this double-edged sword of bringing awareness, but also feeling a lot of fear of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. And you have this quote that says, I believe the antidote to defensiveness or shutdown, which is what I was in relation to this, is compassion for self. And I actually wanted to start with that in case any of my listeners felt the same as I did and feel the same of am I going to do something wrong? Have I done anything to ever harm somebody, whether it is, somebody of Indigenous origins or somebody else, right? We shut down and we get very defensive and it actually blocks us from receiving this beautiful medicine.
Yeah, I think what I started to notice, this was in 2019, I was talking about cultural appropriation because it was a conversation at the time. So it was before 2020 happened and folks were asking me to speak on this. And I had written that letter, Dear White Woman Who Wants to Be Like Me, and that had gone viral. So then, of course, everybody wanted to chat about this. And what I noticed is if I could ask people to drop into their hearts and drop into compassion for self, then there'd be a space for listening, and there's a space for reciprocity and a space for relational communication. And if I didn't do that, then I'd feel that energetic defensiveness and even a freeze or a shutdown, and there was a block. So I got really curious about that and thought, how can I get my message across in a way where we can develop this co-creation, this reciprocity, this relational energy together? And that's really where it stemmed from, I felt, is when we are being hard on ourselves or we're shaming ourselves or we feel shamed, then we shut down and we can't hear anything. It's like that child that goes into that sort of trauma response or freeze response. But when we can hold that space of, I'm human, I make mistakes. If I've harmed somebody, I can make amends. We make space and we have that curious mind and heart. I think that's where healing can come. because I am a healer, I have a very different view than I think all Indigenous people would have a different view of this. But that's where my standpoint comes from, is I want us to heal together because I want us to move forward together. And if we're all stuck frozen and shamed and unable to even communicate with one another, we're not going to shift anything.
Oh my gosh. Yes, yes, yes. And as I was reading your book, I was like, wow, it's so cool to see like a similar path in that, like wanting to increase capacity to feel and to heal and to be with ourselves, and just doing it in, very like different ways. But at the same time is all about coming back to self.
Yeah,
And go ahead.
Well, that's the title of the book. You are the medicine.
Okay.
And I've always been an introspective person. I think that's part of my personality. And as a homeopath, asking folks questions, I spent a lot of years with thousands of people in my little office, just asking those questions and asking, well, how does that make you feel? What sensations does that bring up? And just getting people realigned to that conversation of, oh, I've never even thought about that. I've never even listened to my body before. And that's how we've all been colonized. So this just isn't an Indigenous experience. I believe we've all been colonized from our connection to our bodies.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And one of the things that I have like written as my like reminder and my why is that when I increase the collective capacity to look, we increase the collective capacity to heal. That's what I have written for myself as my why. Because I think this inability to look at the pain, which you talk about so beautifully, and to really see each other for where we are and who we are and our wholeness, including all of the pains and the truths behind it, is what moves us forward.
Mm-hmm. I believe that wholeheartedly. And as we know, you have a healing energy and I have a healing energy. That's like we have that sort of resonance together, that we can only go as deep as we are sort of willing to go ourselves, right? And imagine we all committed to going just a little bit deeper. Or imagine we just committed to seeing another person's pain and lived experience. I think it's so valid and vital to be a space holder for somebody else's lived experience and just have that bit of understanding. Well, I haven't lived in those shoes and I haven't walked that, but what would it be like to do that? I think our hearts would just burst open a little bit more. So that's my hope in sharing the stories of the truth of our country and Turtle Island.
Yes, that's so beautiful. And just speaking of hearts bursting open, because I think it's so interesting that you even like use that expression, is like, I know for myself, that's sometimes what can even get in the way of doing this work, is that bursting open is often painful. Like when I feel my heart opening, the way I envision it, I'm so curious to see it here if you have like a visual to it. But my envisioning is as my heart's opening, it's literally like opening these doors and pressing all the pain to the surface, because that has to in order for it to open, which means that I have to move through pain for it to, like, I don't know how to, at least I have not yet gotten to the point where I can just feel the opening without the pain of everything that just hasn't been felt from my lineage and from my ancestors. And as I've been able to increase my capacity to hold that and to move through it, my heart's been able to open more and more and more. And I think you speak to this so beautifully. Yeah.
I love that. And I think we can titrate it. We've done similar work in learning in these containers together, but I do think we don't have to let it burst forward all at once and flood us. And I think sometimes that's why we get afraid, because the flooding has happened and we think, I don't want to go back there, or that was too much. So what if we just took a little bit at a time? And I think with social media too, we are bombarded by so much pain that's happening on this planet and the earth and with humanity, that it does flood us, no matter who we are, how sensitive or empathic we are just flooded with that. So that's why those boundaries of how much am I going to take in today? How much can my system really hold today? Yes, I want to take action. Yes, I want to speak up. Yes, I want to be an ally or an accomplice. How am I going to do that in the way where I am still sustained and my system can show up in that way? Otherwise, we will just get flooded and shut down. And I've seen that happen over and over again.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. I know that's what I experienced for myself. And thank you for speaking to that so beautifully about the titration. Yes, absolutely. We do not and should not, nor do we need to feel it. We can't feel it all at once. There's something that you wrote about white people who take everything, and I'm reading this is a quote, take everything they considered beautiful as their own and leave all the trauma and truth behind. And this is in terms of using the indigenous practices or medicines and just appropriating them. And when I read that, I mean, one, I want you to speak on that as well. I want to give you a chance to speak on that just in itself. But when I read that, I realized for myself that, so I'm Jewish, and my ancestors, and my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. And, I have a lot of trauma in my lineage. And I realized that for myself, I had taken all the trauma and none of the beauty of Judaism. Like, all I knew was the trauma, because my family had basically just abandoned Judaism altogether. And I grew up with very little of it and very little exposure to the beauty. And really all that's left is the trauma. And it really inspired me to, because you said this very, very early on, to start finding the beauty, right, in Judaism and all of the amazing practices. So I just want to say thank you, because those words right there inspired me to take a deeper dive into the beauty of my own culture that I just had never even realized existed.
Oh, I love that so much. And maybe, as you express that, I think about the why. I always think about the why. Why are non-Indigenous people so attracted to our medicines? Why will they not see the rest of it, And I get curious about that. But that's a beautiful thing. If many of us have trauma in our lineage, no matter what our background is. So perhaps we're blocked from the beauty. So we're blocked from our own beauty. How can we invite ourselves to be unblocked by that and heal that?
And then you also say that this is an invitation to really see Indigenous people and the issues they deal with in present day, and to see the medicines and the teaching, this holding of both. And I think throughout your book, this is such a beautiful theme of holding both. It's not one or the other.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people have put us in the past and sort of stamped us there and rooted us there. And they don't see the evolution that many Indigenous people have come and moved through, or the healing that we've moved through. And it is a bit tricky, because we're asking folks to honor the history and honor what has been, and then also see us now, and also see the impacts of that history on us now, because it's not that long ago. The last residential schools closed in the 90s. That's in a lot of people's, that's in their lifetime. That wasn't that long ago. And then for people like myself, it's my grandparents' generation. And as you know, having Holocaust survivors as grandparents, that those stories, that energy, that generational trauma, it's just passed down through stories, through words, through energy. So that is in our lifetime. And then people say, get over it. And you can just see how you just can't, because that impact has so many generational, just imprints for so many people. And we're struggling on so many First Nations with so many issues that people don't understand. And that trauma of almost, that genocide attempt really, really impacts people to this day. And I struggle with that, when something happens that feels like I'm not being seen, or because I'm an Indigenous woman, you're not going to honor or respect me. I can feel those threads of all of that racism that happened. People say, well, we're such a more open community now, an open country. And I just don't always see that. And that's not always my experience. So those things matter.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And we know trauma is passed down through the DNA. And like you said, it's not just the DNA, it's also the stories, our lived experiences, your lived experiences. And what you said, you're like, I don't always see that. And I think being able to hold someone else's truth and realize it is different from your own, I always wonder why that is so hard for us to do, because it is hard.
It really is. I've been practicing that, I've been in communication with folks with completely different political views, completely different, religious views, all of the things. And I've been really practicing, what does it feel like to sit with this? And this is probably what would mend the world too, if we could sit with each other. I really, I feel like I'm blaming social media a lot in this interview, but I do see how it's it's got this very black and white energy and very divisive energy. And I do think if we sat in circle and we spoke heart to heart, and we saw somebody's eyes and thought, oh my goodness, there's a spirit in there, there's a light in there, there's a connection in there, we would start to soften a little bit.
Oh my gosh, I so agree. And I'm so with you. And I feel like lately I've been on a little bit of a social media trend, but it's because of that. I really can see where certain conversations that I used to have with people have become much more challenging. And it is because of social media and this black and white thinking. It really ingrains it in. I recently just had an experience where she's like a cousin of my husband, whatever that relation is. And like his family is very different from my family. He's from like Kentucky hollers. And I am friends with her on social media. And I actually think at one point I may have just blocked, her posts, because every time I saw her post, I would just be very angry at a lot of her posts. And we have very different worldviews. And then just this past weekend, they had a little family reunion and I found myself talking to her for like almost 2 hours. And I just forget how lovely of a person she is, and how almost every time we have these family gatherings, her and I always are like the ones talking and just have such great conversations. And it's like, we just forget the humanity. No, we don't agree on a lot of issues, but we're two moms and there's a lot of things we do agree on and can get along with and just have great conversation about. And I'm like, man, I can just see where it becomes so divisive if I just looked at your post that you choose to post, right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm here for expanding our hearts and minds beyond social media.
Yes.
And coming back to this humanity. I believe in us. I think that we can do this. We can develop more connection. That was when everybody asked, what's the intention of your book? Or even when, the publisher or marketing people would say like, how do you describe your book in, 3 sentences? It sounded so boring, because what I really wanted was reconnection. It wasn't like, manifest your best life or make 6-figure, 7-figure, but like, it's not these like big flashy thing. It was like, how can we come back to reconnection with ourselves, with one another, with humanity, with all of creation? Reconnection is where we start from. So that feels like the foundation to everything. But of course, it's not the most sexy or flashy in this world.
I don't know. It's pretty sexy and flashy to me, Asha. That's why I bought the book immediately. And I don't buy a lot of books. I'm a big library person, but this was like, I have to own this.
Oh,
even though I didn't read it for a while, but it's okay.
I love that you shared that though, because I think many people have asked me, even as my Oracle deck came out, am I allowed to use this? And I was actually shocked by that question, because I just assumed, well, I'm with Hay House. And of course, this is like a huge publishing house. Of course, I'm creating this for all people. And I love that people were reverent. I love that they asked that question. I love that they treated it as sacred knowing. And if anything, I think if you ask yourself that question, then it means yes, 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 please use it, because you know that you are going to hold it with care and with tenderness. And I started to speak about it because I thought, oh, I didn't even realize that people would think that. So I just created another deck. It's in its edits right now. It's an animal spirit deck. And I wrote in the intro about everybody using this information in this way. And Indigenous people will get upset that I'm sharing these teachings. And on the other hand, there's been so many non-Indigenous people sharing these teachings. So I have to ask, well, who do you want sharing these teachings? If I have the opportunity to take up space and take up a stage, and, be here and have a platform, how am I not going to take that? These creators calling to me, my ancestors are pushing me forward in this. How am I not going to take that opportunity when you're mad that all these other people are sharing it and they're not from our lineage? So it's been a tricky path to walk in so many ways. And even I am just getting more clear on it as I go.
Oh, that is so beautiful. And I love your willingness to share, even though you say other Indigenous people are mad at you for this. Like that, I can't even imagine the amount of just courage and bravery and, what inner work that might go behind that. At least it would for me, because it can be so scary when people that we feel like are part of our community are mad at us.
Yeah. And my people pleaser self rises up a lot. And I think that, yeah, it's been a daily practice, because sometimes things will still rattle my nervous system when I see somebody with that sort of calling out energy, or it's not always offered in this question and curiosity place. It's always more of an attack energy. So I've had to learn how to regulate myself around that. I'm not perfect at it yet.
I don't think we ever are, right? And I wrote like so many random notes. It was so funny. I restarted rereading and started dog earing. And I was like, I'm dog earing every page of Hey Adrienne to like not. So I try to pull out little things. But it is, the Thunderbird medicine, the daily practice to continuously align ourselves with our energy and see what we have to offer the world is of great value. And you talk about a practice of like zipping into yourself every morning. And I was like, oh, I love that. And I just love your emphasis on the daily practice.
Yes. And all of these that I share are things that I've done or things that I've had to turn to because I felt not connected, or I felt on those days of doubt. It's not easy. I think we project a lot on people that we look up to or people that we feel, have wisdom in medicine. It's not. It takes practice. And I think that we somehow think that they've got it somehow or they've got it down. And I only continue to do this because I practice every day. I like to continue to do this because, everything I wrote in my book, they're part of my ritual and my ceremony. But without those things, it would be really hard to show up in the world and share my medicine. So I understand when people are frightened or scared or feel doubts, because that goes through cycles too with me a lot.
Yes. And since you just said cycles, I would love for you to touch on the cycles, because I think we all forget that life is cycles. And that is another theme that is just so beautiful in the book. And I think we expect to have this, like, we just show up as the same person every day and we have this perfect day and we're perfectly authentically ourselves. And that's going to be the most fullest energy. And it's like, no, that's not how it works now, is it?
No, it's not. We could be so hard on ourselves about that. Every single day is different. And I love that sort of teaching of like, this is your best. This is your best today. And your best today could be at, if you're not feeling well, it could be like 50%, but you still showed up at your 50%, which is still your best, right?
Yes.
So I think that those are really beautiful teachings. And the earth teaches us about cycles. And we see those memes on social media. We see not everything blossoms at the same time. And, the leaves fall off the trees and they die. But do we actually begin to embody that and take that in and notice? Well, of course, I live in a place that really cycles through the seasons quite intensely, but does Mother Earth ever stop and ever like just stay in summer the whole time? No, she has to move through to fall and then to winter. So imagine we gave ourselves the same permission to take that much of a season for rest, for death and letting go, for those curious steps we take before we take a leap of faith, like all of those things. If we gave ourselves compassion and care for those times as we cycle through, I think we'd all be rooted in our medicine a little bit more profoundly. I think we could see each other's more clearly. We wouldn't compare and contrast so much, because I know that happens to me all the time. And I think that if we could just trust those cycles, when I'm in like a death cycle or a rest cycle, I still find myself, it's so hard. And I still find myself disoriented thinking, why is nothing dropping in? Why do I have nothing to say? Why do I feel so lost? And I can shame myself for that. And I also know at the other end, so much medicine has dropped in. So now I'm learning every time, okay, let this letting go happen. Let this sort of darkness and disorientation happen, because there's medicine here and there's magic here. And you might not be able to see it yet, but trust. But it's the hardest one. It's the hardest one for me and for everyone.
Oh my gosh, it's so hard. And thank you for just so openly speaking about it being hard, right? I think sometimes we get the impression that it's like, oh, this is something that we just totally master and we move through each cycle with complete ease and no resistance. One of my clients left me a message the other day and she's like, I still had this reaction, but then I shifted out of it, but that reaction was still there. And I was like, but you shifted out of it. I was like, screw, who cares if the reaction's still there? That's always going to be there. It's not about not having the initial like resistance to whatever is coming up. It's about noticing it and then allowing yourself to move into whatever feels most supportive in that moment.
Yeah. And again, it takes practice. I think even if we did it 10 times before and we think, why is this lesson coming back to me? I thought I healed that already. We have healed something. We have rooted something down into our knowing, in our bones. You have done the work. So we always have to trust that when those cycles come back to us. It's just another layer of teaching. And because I can be like that too. I'm just like, oh, geez, I thought I felt so peaceful after that. Now it's happening again. So we have to trust that layer has been tended to. And we will be able to source from that at some point in our lives.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Yes. Thank you for that. And I know you, obviously, my audience has a lot of chronic pain or chronic symptoms, and you yourself have had a lupus diagnosis. And you don't mind me reading something from your book. I just thought it spoke to it so beautifully and very much from a paradigm that I tend to operate out of as well, of when I didn't listen to my body, the nudges would get louder, eventually becoming symptoms, more extended flares, and illness. Our world teaches us to push harder, go for more, and drive ourselves at the expense of our health and well-being. This leads to burnout, chronic disease, and other disorders. And I'll add absolutely chronic pain. Many of us lose the ability to make rest and play a priority. And if we continue in this way, our bodies will stop us. The wisdom of Bare Moon calls us back to the truth that it is not humanly possible to move through life without breaks. We are Earth, and we too must cycle through our seasons. So beautiful. But yeah, if you don't mind speaking to the chronic piece, because I think this is something that obviously my listeners really are struggling with.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with lupus when I was 17. And at the time, I didn't have a lot of symptoms. So it wasn't until I went to university that the stress increased, and then my symptoms got a lot worse. And I couldn't find any help at the time. The doctors didn't, well, not that they didn't help, but they offered medications that were really harsh for my body. And because my body is so sensitive, it felt like just too much. Again, like I was flooded with too much. And the side effects were things that I didn't really want to deal with when I was so young. So that's when I started to look closer to the earth, and I started to see naturopaths and different alternative healing modalities. I tried those out, and I eventually became a homeopath. That's what led me to homeopathy, because homeopathy, being an energy medicine, really spoke to that sensitive soul and that sensitive empathic nature. It's energy. And when I took remedies and noticed a huge healing effect on my mind, body, and spirit, I thought, this is it. This is what's been missing, because of course it's not just my physical body. It's my mind and my heart and my spirit. And over these last 30 years, it's been a journey. People say, are you healed? Are you cured? No, I have flares. I have symptoms. I still struggle with chronic pain every day, and I live with it. I think even myself being in this wellness world and alternative health world, I can see how I'm unwinding from all of these paradigms of you must heal yourself this way. And I've tried all the diets, all the alternative therapies, all of the things. And I've shamed myself many times from not following through for a year on just doing green juices or, whatever those protocols are offered to you. So I've been through a huge journey of coming back to loving myself more deeply, having that self-compassion, that softening, that tending. That's really where the healing for me has been. If I can listen to that voice that speaks, as I shared in my book, that says, you are tired, please go take a nap. At your max of all of these bookings, why are you saying yes to this? You don't have the capacity for this. That colonized version of me, or that colonized trauma, is always operating in the background saying, do more, hustle, push. You're not good enough unless you prove your worth. So I've had to unwind a lot of that. And lupus has been the teacher, the voice for me to unwind all of that. So it's profound, and it's still challenging. Chronic pain is challenging.
It is. It really, really is. And thank you for speaking to that, and especially the piece of where we start to have perfectionism about healing in itself. Like it's got to be done this certain way, or that there's something, wrong with you if you can't follow through or haven't healed yet or are still experiencing pain. And it's, oh my goodness, I think all of those are just added layers on top of everything else, and ultimately become such a distraction from even tending to what really needs to be tended to. And I just want to, say it's not your fault that that's something that you feel is added pressure onto yourself, right? Our society teaches us that we need to have a certain body and a certain way of being. And I know you speak to that as well, of like, if our body isn't functioning at this optimal level, then again, it's one more thing that is not good enough, in quotes.
Yeah, and we've done something wrong. Like, I think that's the big thing. And I think what wellness has missed for many years, because I've been in this industry for over 2 decades now, and I've seen it change and shift and missed out on some of those impacts of generational harm, of white supremacy, of systemic racism, not seeing those pieces and parts of our systems as a whole and the impacts they have, and then shaming the individual for being sick and not being able to heal themselves and not acknowledging and addressing the impacts of white supremacy on our bodies, on a brown or Black or Indigenous body, is doing a disservice to so many people. So I am here to completely hold space for that, because that is something that's only come into my own awareness over the last, I'd say 5 to 7 years, that I've had to unwind as well.
Yes, absolutely. I am so in agreement of that. And I see it for so many of my clients. And I think it is so important to have an understanding of what an individual's lineage is and what their ancestors may have experienced, and to make sure that you're speaking to that. And again, I think you speak to this so beautifully, of a way to honor and respect Indigenous traditions is to know the history behind them. Growing up, my mom always used to be like, if only you knew the history, or what was her phrase? It'd always be like, you just need to know the history. And it drove me nuts. And I have found myself saying this now, of like, you need to understand the history. That's the word. That's the phrase. I found myself saying this to like my husband and just other people. If you understand the history, and I'm like, oh my goodness, how my mom was right all along. I totally see, because she grew up in like a communist country where they had no freedoms and everything was restricted, and they couldn't say anything out loud without fear of literally being killed. And it's like, it is important to understand the history from which you came, because it's carried in your body.
I love that she said that to you. I love how we become our mothers.
Oh my gosh.
Literally, was right
all the time. It's so annoying. I like will randomly send her, texts anytime I'm reading history. I'm like, look, Mom, I'm reading the history. I get it now. Because we'd always roll our eyes.
Oh, I love that so much. And understanding, and I know we're not all of us are going to be historians, right?
No.
That's not, even for myself, that's not really the lens that I speak from or teach from necessarily. I teach from like the impacts of the history in my bones and what that's done, right? So I think, but it's really not hard, as you've noticed, because you read the history, to go back and see and even hear people's stories. I think that's not hard. It's not a big ask for us to do that.
It's not. It's really not. And I think there's so many ways you can do it. Fun might not be my definition of fun might not be the same as other people's definition of fun, because I'm like, ooh, let's read about trauma. but like, I mean, like literally historical fiction books, I feel like are such a accessible way. If there's just look on Amazon, it takes a couple readings of some reviews to be like, is this historically accurate? And the amount of, I feel like, history and story you can get, even if it's a fiction or if it's a memoir, is another beautiful way. I feel like that is one of my favorite ways to interact with history, is just reading people's stories. And sometimes it's a fiction story, but it's such a wonderful way to expose ourselves to that in a way that's light. It doesn't have to be.
I love that as people's homework. Go read a historical fiction book or listen to it on Audible and on your daily walk, just take it in, because I think there is something to be said about it not having to be serious all the time, or, that we need to, there's that guilt and shame piece too. I think that some folks put themselves in. I've noticed that a lot. People will say, they'll come to me and say, I'm just so sorry. And, apologize to people, which is like very kind, but I don't need you to do that necessarily. I would love for you to uplift my work or have me on a podcast or have a conversation, and all of that outpouring of guilt and shame. I can feel that. And we can release that if we're taking action and we're intentionally speaking and sharing and building relationships. You can forgive yourself, or you can release some of that. I think that's so important, because that also gets in the way, right? And maybe doing it so seriously too is part of that. Like, I must punish myself and do it this way. So I think the lightness that you've offered is such a beautiful way of just softening again the way that we can learn.
Yes. So beautifully said. And yes, to bring humor in. I remember I have one of the same, just from the program we're in, of Dr. Valerie Wright, one of the same mentors of Jeffrey Tambor. And I remember having a session with him, and I can't even remember the image, but it was so dark, Asha. It was so dark. And I bust out laughing like, I just couldn't stop laughing all of a sudden. He was just like, you know him, he's just so just joyful as well and can, take humor like any one of us. And just, oh my gosh, we just had such a great time of just laughing at like the absolute darkness of this image I had, because it just became funny that like, oh, inside my stomach, I'm experiencing this thing that is totally in my mind, but clearly my cells are holding on to, but it's not real. Like, I don't know. It was just this really profound experience. And ever since then, I've just been able to have so much more lightness in this work. And even I have some dark visuals. I can, have some very dark things that come up, but to have the lightness with them at the same time is, I think, it's been one of the most powerful healing things on my journey.
I agree with that. I think that ability to hold both, that dark and light. And goodness, how are we going? Yeah, how else would we feel this earth? Like, that's what I'm here to, for the dancing and the laughing and the playfulness. Those things I want to make way more room for. So we can do this work with those things too. And I think that we can invite ourselves to be a little bit more lighthearted.
Oh my goodness. Yes, yes, yes. I love that. And you have another medicine from the Canada Goose of that true oneness comes from seeing the truth of another's reality. And that was another just piece that I wanted to bring up, because it's so crucial, again, to be able to hold, I think, both our own reality and someone else's. Again, this just like paradox or the nuance of both. And yeah, I would just love you to speak to that a little bit more. And I know you have a little bit already. So
yeah, I think I love the Canada Goose teaching, because it's also, we don't leave anybody behind. And what I've noticed in this world, and because I think I'm trying to sort of share my medicine in like a coaching world where a lot of white women have risen really quickly, and I noticed just the dynamics there. The not leaving anybody behind is an interesting concept, because I think that we don't always think about that. We are thinking about people who look like us and act like us and are in our communities, and we're not seeing those that maybe aren't part of those communities. So my invitation is to look beyond, to widen your gaze to those that perhaps you're not used to being in communication with. And that's why I love the goose, because there's almost like their wing, widens the gaze and says, let's invite other opinions and perspectives, colors of skin, ways of being, cultural awareness, languages, all of those things. It invites that in. And I really wish the world would do that.
Yes, yes. And again, I know we've talked about this already, but I just want to bring that full circle, that I think what allows the world to do that is when we can be in tune with ourselves. I really do feel like it starts with a relationship with ourselves.
Yeah, you're right. We talked about that building capacity, right, for opening. If we can build the capacity for compassion, it all begins with compassion in my view, because if we can build that compassionate connection with ourselves, then there's softness there, and we're not going to shut down and be so hard and critical with ourselves. We can say, oh my goodness, right, I had the conversation, it was a little bit sticky. Oh, I have compassion because I'm learning and I'm human and now I'm growing and I'm evolving. And we always have that growth mindset like we have with our children, right? We're all growing. I am learning every single day. I don't do it all right, but I'm here to try.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. And you speak to this, like the ability to make mistakes and to be learning and to have that sticky conversation, like you said. And it takes being able to hold the discomfort of all of those things and realizing that nothing has gone wrong. And I think sometimes, speaking of bringing social media back in, right, there's, again, beautiful modelings and teaching us of like how to have this conversation or how to approach this or how to set this boundary, which can be so beautiful and helpful. And then if we already are seeing the world through this lens of perfectionism, through a lens of we're not allowed to make mistakes, then we use all of that against ourselves. We use it to be like, I have to say these exact words in this conversation, which then makes it so when we're having a conversation, we can't actually even see the person in front of us. We're so focused on, a script.
Yes. Yes. And I know that like 2020 really set us up for that because it was so, and then the pandemic. So we go through 2020 and then we go through the pandemic and there was just so much energy. I don't even know if we've caught up to the flooding that those years really brought our way. I still think we're healing from that. I was doing some speaking engagements last fall, and I was talking about the sort of defrosting from that time. I still think we're doing that. So let's have compassion for ourselves and each other too, as we're moving through those times, because it impacted everybody very differently. And I think that we can't just leap over the amount of impact it had.
Yeah. Oh, I just got like full body chills as you said that. It makes me realize, and this is a not fully formed thought, but it's one that I've had and it just came back in, that I think my experience of the pandemic, I had a really good experience in the pandemic, which I understand sounds weird, but like it was a time that, I mean, I never stopped working. I was an essential worker at the time, but our clinic, we just had a ton of fun. It was like a very light time for us. We were as like me and my best buddies at the clinic playing movies because our patient load was so low. And then we moved across the country and we went on a road trip that was very, just not really exposing ourselves to anybody. So it was this very nature experience. And then we got to move and we got to stay with our in-laws who like live again in just gorgeous Kentucky, like rural Kentucky. So it was just it was a very like healing time because it was a lot of introspection and a lot of restarting of our lives in different ways. It was when I then like moved into my business. And so I think I tend to forget that was not everybody's experience.
And it's interesting because we are connected online. Mm-hmm. So we were in the most locked down place in North America, in Ontario. And we could not basically leave our houses for almost that whole time. So I would speak to people in different states and they'd be like, well, what are you talking about? So that's another example of really stepping in somebody else's shoes and seeing, oh my goodness, yes, we're talking on screen. And right now your children are home. They're not ever going to go back to school. Yeah. We're trying to run your business full time and write your book.
Goodness.
It was very traumatizing for me. Those 2 years were really, really hard. And just the way that our province was set up, it was just very locked down. We couldn't go anywhere. So yeah, that's a perfect example, right? Of two different experiences. We don't live that far away, really. And yeah, that I think if we have that mindset always of, oh, right, that might not be everybody's experience.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Just remembering that. So one, thank you just for reminding me of that. And I think you're so right of like, we have not defrosted from this experience at all. I think there's a lot more healing to come from it for sure.
Which is always a good thing. The vision for healing and moving forward is a beautiful thing.
Yes. Thank you so much, Asha. And I feel like I could talk to you forever. I want to be respectful of your time though. Is there anything that you'd love to leave people with? Any just words of wisdom or medicine?
I hope that you can have compassion for yourself in these conversations and in your healing journey with chronic pain. I think that I want to say, I see you, I understand to the depth that I can. And I hope that you just know that you are so perfect as you are. That's what I feel.
So beautiful. Thank you. And I highly, highly recommend checking out Asha's book, You Are the Medicine. And she has some beautiful oracle decks. And is there any other things that you want to just share, or where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I'm Asha.Frost. And I have actually a moon offering coming out. That's a 12-month ceremony offering that goes along with the book. So if you've read the book, you don't have to have read the book, but it just helps us to embody the teachings and to move through them in ceremony together. So that's what's coming out soon.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much for just sharing your medicine and your words and just being here. I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Andrea.